She was 19 years old, and she had $10 left in the world. Not $10 until payday. Not $10 in her pocket, while the rest sat in a checking account, somewhere gathering modest interest. $10. Total. The last bill folded once in the small leather satchel she carried over her left shoulder. The same satchel her father had used to carry valve oil and cork grease to jobs when she was small. And the smell of the leather still held faintly the ghost of both. She stood at the edge of a sand road in the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey on a morning in late March of 2023 and looked at a building she had never seen before in her life. And something in her chest went very quiet, in a way that felt less like emptiness and more like recognition. The building was long and low, maybe 70 feet from end to end, sided in wooden clapboard that had once been painted cream, but had weathered over 65 years to the color of old bone. The trim had been mint green once. Now it was the color of lichen on a headstone. A low-pitched shingle roof ran the length of the structure with patches missing near the far end where the bandstand would be, and in those gaps you could see the dark interior sky of a building that had been open to weather for longer than she had been alive. Above the narrow front entrance hanging from a single remaining bracket, at a slight downward angle, was a marquee board. The kind with removable letters, the kind you saw in front of old movie theaters and church halls and dance venues across the American Northeast for most of the 20th century. The board had been blank for 65 years. The bracket holding it on the right side had pulled loose from the fascia board sometime in the last decade, and the whole sign listed like a ship taking on water. But it had not fallen. Wren. June Santee looked at the blank marquee board for a long moment. Then she adjusted the strap of the leather satchel on her shoulder, shifted the weight of the accordion case in her left hand, and walked toward the front door. She had come a long way to stand here, farther than the map showed. Her grandfather, Sal Santee, had been born in 1928 in a walk-up apartment in Hoboken, New Jersey. The son of Sicilian immigrants who had arrived at Ellis Island with 3 suitcases, a cornet in a battered case, and a combined 60 words of English between them. His father, Wren's great-grandfather, had played that cornet at weddings and feast days in the Italian neighborhoods of Hudson County, for 20 years passing the case to Sal. On the morning of his 13th birthday, the way another man might pass a son, a pocket knife, or a set of keys. Sal had learned the cornet the way children of that time and place learned everything useful, by watching, by listening, by doing it wrong until he did it right. He was playing by ear at 13, reading charts at 15, sitting in with pickup bands at the Italian social clubs along Washington Street in Hoboken at 17. By the time he was 19, he had a reputation along the Jersey Shore as a trumpet man with good time and an honest tone, which in the world of small club jazz in 1947 was exactly the kind of reputation that kept the phone ringing. He spent the decade between 1948 and 1958 playing wherever the work was. Shore clubs and ballrooms and VFW halls and dance venues up and down the coast from Asbury Park to Cape May. He drove a 1949 Ford that burned oil and had a heater that worked only on certain mornings. And he carried his horn in a case that he kept on the back seat and never put in the trunk because he did not trust the trunk latch. He played 6 nights a week some months. He played 2 nights other months. He never turned down a job that paid honest money, and he never padded a set with material he didn't believe in. In the summer of 1952, when he was 24 years old and driving the oil-burning Ford down a 2-lane blacktop through the pitch pines of Burlington County. He had stopped at a dance hall on a sand road off the main highway because he could hear the music from the road. And a musician who could hear music from the road and chose not to stop was not the kind of musician Sal Santee wanted to be. The dance hall was called Harrow Mills. The band inside was an 8-piece outfit called Lou Mancini and the Pine 8, and they were playing to a room that was 3/4 full on a Saturday night in August, which in Burlington County in 1952 was a respectable crowd. Sal stood in the back for one full set. At the break, the band leader, a compact man with dark eyes and careful hands named Lou Mancini, came off the stage and saw Sal standing there with the trumpet case and asked him if he wanted to sit in for the second set. Sal said yes. He always said yes. He played the second set and most of the third, and then he got back in the Ford and drove north toward Asbury Park and never came back to Harrow Mills again, because that was how it worked. You played the room once and you moved on. There were always more rooms. But Lou Mancini had a brother-in-law named Sammy Garibaldi who carried a portable acetate cutting rig in the trunk of his Pontiac and recorded the Saturday night sets when he was in town. And Sammy had been in town that August night in 1952. And somewhere in the second set, Sal Santee had taken a solo that ran 47 seconds and did not waste a single one of them. Sal Santee never recorded professionally. He played 30 years of live music on the Jersey Shore and left no documentation of any of it except the memories of people who had been in the rooms. He became the house drummer at Convention Hall on the Asbury Park Boardwalk in 1962, a job he held until 1979, trading the trumpet for a 4-piece kit somewhere in his mid-30s when the club work dried up and the steady union gig was the smarter move. He played the same drum kit for 17 years. He walked to work every day of those 17 years because everything he needed was within walking distance of the shore. He died when Wren's father was 12 years old. She had never met him. She knew him only through the stories her father told her on the evenings when they sat together in the small apartment above the repair shop on Cookman Avenue after the workbench tools had been set down for the night, and the smell of brass polish was a low constant in the rooms, and Cass Santee would reach back into the part of his memory where his father lived and bring something out into the light for his daughter. Wren had grown up on those stories the way other children grew up on picture books. Her father, Cass Santee, was the kind of man who could be accurately described in a single image, a man at a workbench with a saxophone open in front of him, and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and his hands moving over the body of the instrument with the absolute certainty of someone who has done this particular thing so many times that the knowledge has migrated from his brain into the tissue of his fingers. He had grown up in the back rooms of Asbury Park music venues, the son of a drummer heir to a family tradition that expressed itself not in conversation or sentiment, but in the daily practice of putting sound into the world with care and precision. He could read sheet music before he could read chapter books. By 14, he was playing tenor saxophone in a small jazz combo at a club on Cookman Avenue, not well enough to make a career of it, but well enough to understand exactly what the instrument was asking of him. What it was asking, he eventually concluded, was that he learn to fix it rather than play it. He took an apprenticeship with an old German instrument repairman named Otto Kellner, who ran a shop on the corner of Cookman and Main, and who had trained in Munich before the war. and had opinions about pad thickness and key geometry that he expressed with the intensity of a man discussing matters of moral consequence. When Otto retired in 1991, Cass took over the shop and renamed it Santee Wind Repair, and ran it from that year forward with the same focused, unhurried precision Otto had modeled. He worked on saxophones and clarinets and trumpets and the occasional French horn. He had clients who drove from Newark and Atlantic City, and once memorably from Philadelphia. The shop smelled like cork and valve oil, and the particular metallic sweetness of freshly polished brass. And it was in the way that certain small rooms become the most honest expression of the person who occupied it. Wren's mother had died 3 days after Wren was born, from a complication the doctors had not anticipated. Cass raised Wren alone above the shop on Cookman Avenue, in a 2-room apartment where the sound of horns being tested in the workbench below was as constant and unremarkable as traffic. She learned to sleep through the long, low moan of a saxophone getting its low B-flat pad replaced. She learned to recognize the clean, bright cascade of a trumpet after a valve cleaning. She learned to tell a Selmer from a Con from a Yamaha by the tone her father produced when he blew the first test note after a repair, a sound that was less like music and more like a conversation between a craftsman and a tool, each assessing the other. When she was 8, Cass taught her the accordion, not because the accordion was the instrument of her generation or of her time, but because it had been Sal Santee's instrument in the years before the trumpet, in the Hoboken apartment with the cornet in the case. And Cass believed that certain objects accumulated meaning through use and should be passed forward rather than set aside. The accordion had been Sal's first instrument. It would be Wren's. She practiced every evening in the apartment above the shop after her homework was done. In good weather, she carried it down to the Asbury Park boardwalk on weekends and played for tips outside the Stone Pony, where her grandfather had once walked every day with a drum key in his pocket, and his whole life organized around the pleasurable discipline of keeping time. She was good. Not prodigy good, not competition good, but the kind of good that comes from genuinely not being able to imagine not playing, which is a rarer and more durable kind of good than talent alone. She kept the tip money in a green metal coffee tin under the floorboards of her bedroom closet, not because she was secretive by nature, but because Vera Hollis had a way of noticing cash. Vera Hollis had married Cass Santee when Wren was 11 years old. She worked at a real estate office on Main Street and wanted in the most fundamental sense a quieter life than the one the apartment above Santee Wind Repair offered. Quieter and less saturated. Less full of the sound of instruments being tested at 7 in the evening and the smell of brass polish in the hallway, and the particular brand of focused musical silence that Cass carried with him through every room he occupied. She had been considerate toward Wren in the early years, considerate in the way that is really a form of effort, rather than feeling the kind of consideration that requires maintenance and eventually runs out. By the time Wren was 13, she had understood this without being told, and had adjusted accordingly, keeping herself small in the shared spaces, practicing her accordion only when Vera was out moving through the apartment, with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to take up no more room than necessary. Cass died on a Tuesday afternoon in February of 2021. Heart attack at the workbench. His hand was still wrapped around the body of a Selmer Mark VI. He had been pad replacing for a player from Newark when it happened. The saxophone was found afterwards still in his hands. The new pads only half installed the job left unfinished, in a way that was so entirely unlike him that Wren, when the paramedics told her, had the sudden irrational thought that he would come back to complete it. He was 46 years old. The funeral was small. The saxophone players from Newark and Atlantic City sent flowers. Sister Frances Dowd, who had taught music theory and piano to the children of Asbury Park in the basement of St. Brendan's Parish Hall for over 40 years, and who had taught Cass Santee when he was 12, sat in the front pew beside Wren and held her hand through the service and did not release it until the work at the graveside was finished. The shop closed within the month. Vera had no interest in continuing it. She sold the inventory and the tools to a shop in Newark and put the proceeds into her own account. She told Wren she was entitled to keep the accordion because it had no resale value, and the small wooden box of Cass's personal tools that had not been part of the Newark sale. For 2 years after that, Wren lived in the apartment above the closed shop, in a state of civil, careful distance from Vera. She finished high school. She took a job at a small bakery on Cookman Avenue, whose owner, a solidly practical woman named Rosa, paid her in cash and let her take home the unsold bread on Saturdays. She practiced accordion in the evenings when Vera was out and played for tips on the boardwalk on weekend afternoons, averaging $20 to $30 a day, depending on the season, keeping the money in the green metal coffee tin under the floorboards. Because old habits from childhood have a structural quality that survives the conditions that created them. In February of 2023, she came home from a closing shift at the bakery to find a cardboard box on the landing outside the apartment door. Her clothes, the accordion in its leather case, Cass's small wooden toolbox, the green coffee tin, and on top of the box, placed at the center with a deliberateness that cost something to produce a small velvet pouch containing the only piece of her grandmother's jewelry she had ever owned. A mother-of-pearl rose brooch with a tarnished silver pin that had belonged to Sal Santee's wife, Lucia, and had come across the ocean with the family in 1928, and had lived on Wren's coat lapel on cold days since her grandmother left it to her on her 7th birthday. Vera had gone into Wren's dresser drawer and taken the brooch from where it rested on the nights Wren didn't wear it, and she had placed it in the velvet pouch and put the pouch on top of the box so that the brooch was there present and accounted for, and no one could say she had kept it. Taped to the apartment door was a piece of pale blue stationery, Vera's handwriting careful and upright. Wren, I've accepted an offer on the building and I need the apartment cleared by Friday. I think it's better if we don't stay in contact. The brooch is in the pouch because it belonged to your father's family, not mine. Vera. Wren read it twice. She tried the door. Locked deadbolt thrown from inside. She tried the back stair. Locked. The shop door on Cookman Avenue. Locked. She pinned the mother-of-pearl brooch to the lapel of her corduroy jacket, the same burnt orange jacket she had worn all winter. And she picked up the box and the accordion case and walked 7 blocks through the cold February rain to the basement door of St. Brendan's Parish Hall. And she did not cry because crying was something she had learned to keep for private moments. And February rain on Cookman Avenue was not a private moment. Sister Frances Dowd opened the basement door with a dish towel still in her hands, and one look at Wren's face told her everything she needed to know, without a single question requiring an answer. She brought her inside and wrapped a wool blanket around her shoulders, and sat her on a folding chair beside the old upright piano in the music room, and went to make coffee. Sister Frances was 71 years old and had been teaching music to the children of Asbury Park in that basement for 43 years. She had taught Cass Santee when he was 12. She had taught several hundred other children over those decades, most of whom had grown up and moved forward into their lives and remembered her intermittently, if at all, and some of whom, like Wren, had stayed close in the way that certain student-teacher bonds remain structurally sound long after the formal instruction is ended. When she came back with the coffee, she sat on the piano bench across from Wren and said, "You'll sleep in the supply room behind the music room tonight. There's a folding cot. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next." Wren slept on that folding cot for 2 months. Sister Frances brought a thermos of soup every evening from the small kitchen she shared with the 2 other sisters in the convent house on the next block. She gave Wren a key to the side door so she could come and go without disrupting the after-school program in the late afternoons. On Sunday afternoons after the noon mass cleared out, they played together in the music room, Sister Frances at the piano, and Wren on the accordion, and the sound that filled the small basement room was the sound of 2 musicians who had nothing to prove to each other and everything to say. But Wren understood she could not stay indefinitely. Sister Frances was getting older, and the diocese had been discussing for 2 years the possibility of consolidating St. Brendan's with another parish 3 towns over, and the basement music program would not survive that consolidation. Wren needed somewhere of her own. An apartment in Asbury Park was not possible on bakery wages. She looked at rooms in Long Branch and in Belmar and found herself unable to commit to any of them for reasons she could not fully articulate, which usually means the reasons are not about the rooms. Then, on a Sunday afternoon in late March, Sister Frances slid a folded copy of the Burlington County Times across the top of the upright piano and pointed to a small notice near the bottom of the classified page. It was a county surplus property auction. Wharton Township, Burlington County. 9 abandoned structures being cleared from the tax rolls before a planned spring demolition. A grange hall, a creamery, a 1-room schoolhouse, a volunteer fire shed, a blacksmith's forge, a trapper's cabin, and near the bottom of the list, former Harrow Mills Dance Hall abandoned since 1957. Scheduled for burn pile April 2023. Minimum bid $10. Wren read the listing. Then she read it again. Sister Frances said, "I went through that part of the county once years ago. There was almost nothing left of the old mill town by then except the sand road and the cedar swamp. But someone told me there had been a dance hall there that ran all the way into the 1950s. A band out of Burlington County. Small but well thought of." Wren was not looking at Sister Frances. She was looking at the listing. Harrow Mills, Burlington County. The words had the specific weight of something half-remembered, though she was certain she had never heard them before. Then she opened the leather satchel she kept her father's notebook in the small, spiral-bound workshop notebook Cass had used to track repair jobs and parts orders which she had taken from the toolbox and carried with her since the night on the landing, because it was one of the few objects that still smelled like him. She had looked through it many times. She knew most of its contents, but in the back behind the last page of repair notes, she had always assumed the folded paper tucked into the inside pocket was a spare order form. She had not unfolded it, not once in 2 months. She unfolded it now. It was not an order form. It was a concert program. Old paper, slightly brittle, folded carefully along established creases. that had been made and remade many times over many years. The paper had the particular texture of something handled repeatedly with oil-stained hands. Harrow Mills Dance Hall, Burlington County, New Jersey. Lou Mancini and the Pine Eight. Saturday, August 9th, 1952. And beneath the printed text in her father's handwriting in the narrow, careful slant she had known since she was old enough to recognize handwriting as a signature of a specific human being. Someday, Wren. She sat very still on the folding chair. The music room was quiet. The upright piano stood behind Sister Francis with the lid down. Cass Santee had known about Harrow Mills. He had kept the program for years, long before Wren was born, long before there was a Wren to write her name to. And at some point he had written those two words on it and folded it back into his notebook and carried it into the shop every day after that and never said a word about it. Someday, Wren. He had meant to bring her here, and he had not lived long enough to do it. She looked up at Sister Francis and said, "I have $10. Sister Francis looked back at her with the calm, specific steadiness of a woman who has spent 43 years watching young people arrive at moments of decision and has learned to neither push nor pull, but only to hold the space steady. "I'll pack you a lunch," she said. "Take the morning bus." The bus from Asbury Park to Wharton Township took most of a day, 2 transfers through Tom's River, and then through a small connection point south of Brown's Mills, and the final county shuttle ran twice weekly and left her at a crossroads where the blacktop met a sand road that wound into pitch pines and scrub oak as far as she could see in both directions. 3 miles down that road was the township office. She walked it with the leather satchel on her hip and the accordion case in her left hand, and the mother-of-pearl brooch catching the pale March light on her lapel. The air smelled like resin and cold earth, and somewhere behind the trees, the faint sweetness of a cranberry bog she could not see, but could place by instinct the way her grandfather had placed music by ear, knowing what it was before he could name it. The Wharton Township office was a small frame building beside a shuttered general store on a road that had 4 other buildings on it, and not much else. Inside, a woman in her mid-50s named Dot Eckert sat behind a low counter with a mug of tea and a stack of folders arranged by color. She had the organized, unhurried manner of someone who has been doing the same job well for a very long time and no longer needs to perform competence because it has become invisible to her. "You're here about the dance hall," Dot said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Been closed since 1957. Roof over the bandstand's been open to weather for going on 20 years. No power, no water except the old well out back. And I can't tell you what shape that's in. County's got it scheduled for the burn pile the 2nd week of April. Yes, ma'am. I have $10. Dot looked at her for a moment, not with skepticism and not with pity, with the careful attention of someone reading a situation accurately. She reached under the counter and brought out a deed book, found the page, turned it to face Wren across the counter. "Sign here and here and here." Wren signed her name in the narrow, careful slant her father had taught her. Wren June Santee. 3 times on 3 lines. Dot took the $10 bill, folded it once, and tucked it into a metal cash box. She stamped the deed with a brass stamp that made a soft, final sound, the sound of something being settled. Then she did something Wren had not expected. She opened the top drawer of the desk behind her and took out an envelope. Old paper, cream-colored, gone slightly amber with age. The flap was sealed, either glued or wax-sealed. It was hard to tell. On the front, written in a careful hand that belonged to someone who had spent a lifetime writing music charts, in small, precise strokes, were 5 words. For whoever comes next. Dot set it on the counter between them. Lou Mancini left that with the deed when he turned the property over to the county in 1957, she said. He told the township clerk at the time that whoever eventually bought the building should have it. I'm the 3rd clerk to hold on to it. I expect you're the person it was meant for. Wren looked at the envelope. She picked it up. It was lighter than it looked. She could feel the shape of paper inside it, 1 or maybe 2 folded sheets and something small and hard that shifted slightly when she tilted the envelope. A key, maybe. Or a small object she couldn't identify. She put the envelope carefully into the inside pocket of the leather satchel against the concert program from August 9th, 1952. Dot's nephew had a pickup truck parked out front. He drove her out the sand road through the pitch pines without much conversation, which suited Wren fine, and stopped at the edge of a small clearing where the road curved and the cedar trees began. There she is, he said. Harrow Mills Dance Hall stood at the clearing's edge in the pale March light. Cream-clappered and mint-green trim, both faded to their ghost colors, the blank marquee board listing from its single bracket. The shingle roof sound along most of its length, except near the bandstand end where the weather had made its way in. A narrow wooden ticket booth stood off to one side of the front entrance with its window boarded over. A row of cedar trees pressed close against the back wall where the swamp began. The whole structure had the quality of something that had been holding its position against considerable pressure for a very long time, and had decided as a matter of principle not to yield. Dot's nephew unlocked the padlock on the front door and handed Wren the key. Mavis says she'll check on you in a couple days, he said, which was his way of saying that the world he was returning to had not entirely forgotten she was here. Then he drove back up the sand road and the sound of the engine faded into the pines, and Wren was alone with the building and the silence, and the low, constant sigh of wind in the pitch pines above the cedar swamp. She put the key in the lock and opened the front door. The interior was a single long room 70 feet from the front entrance to the back wall of the bandstand, with a wide pine floor that had been worn soft and silver gray by decades of dancing, and then harder and more isolated by decades of stillness. The wainscoting was painted the same mint green as the exterior trim faded now to the color of old sea glass. A row of cast-iron radiators ran along the north wall, their surfaces furred with dust. At the far end of the room, a raised wooden stage about 2 feet high ran the full width of the back wall, framed by a velvet curtain in a color that had probably once been burgundy and was now the color of old dried roses. The curtain had been pulled to one side and tied back with a length of cord that had stiffened with age. Above the stage, painted directly on the plaster in gold lettering that had faded but not vanished, were the words Harrow Mills Dance Hall, and beneath them in smaller script, St. 1928. The air smelled like coal pine and old varnish, and 65 years of accumulated quiet with underneath it all a faint suggestion of the cigarette smoke from 100 Saturday nights that had long since dissipated, but had left something behind in the wood grain of the walls and the floor. Some molecular trace of all those evenings, all those people, all that music. Wren walked the length of the room slowly, Her boots made a soft, hollow sound on the wide pine boards. The acoustics were extraordinary, even in silence, the way the silence in the room was not the flat, dead silence of an empty, modern building, but something with depth and resonance, as if the room had learned through 30 years of music how to hold sound and had not entirely forgotten. She climbed the 4 wooden steps to the stage. The velvet curtain moved slightly in the air. Current she brought with her and settled again. She walked to the center of the stage, where the floorboards were worn darker than the surrounding surface, darkened not by weather, but by the specific pressure of one person's feet, standing in one spot for 30 years, keeping time, calling the next number, watching the room fill and empty and fill again across 3 decades of Saturday nights. She stood in that spot and looked out across the empty hall. She tried to hear it. The 8-piece band behind her. The couples in their good Saturday clothes on the floor below, the women in swing skirts and the men in their dark suits. The Burlington County farmers and iron workers and cranberry hands who had come here every week to let the music move them. And somewhere behind her on this same stage on one particular August night in 1952, a young trumpet man from Asbury Park who had heard the music from the highway and stopped because he was the kind of musician who stopped. She could almost hear it. Almost. There was an oriental rug rolled up against the back wall of the stage, thin and worn, pushed there by someone 65 years ago. Wren unrolled it across the bandleader's spot and stood on it. The rug was barely thicker than a piece of heavy felt, but it changed the feel of the floor beneath her feet in a way she noticed immediately. The floorboards under the rug sounded different. Not loose, not damaged. Hollower. As if there was a space beneath them that the surrounding stage did not have. Cass Santee had spent 25 years teaching himself to feel the difference between a sealed joint and a hidden one, and he had spent 8 years teaching that sense to his daughter's hands. Wren bent down and rolled the rug aside and ran her fingertip along the seam between 2 boards. The boards were a slightly different shade than the surrounding stage, cut to a slightly different length, fitted neatly together, but not nailed down at the edges the way the rest of the stage was secured. In the seam between 2 boards, she found a small finger-pull recess cut into the wood, no bigger than a dime, packed solid with decades of accumulated dust. She cleared it with her thumbnail. She pulled. The boards lifted together, hinged on a pair of old leather hinges that had hardened with age, but had not failed. A small wooden trapdoor 18 inches square swinging up on those ancient hinges to reveal a shallow compartment fitted between the stage joists. The compartment was lined with oilcloth that had dried and cracked along its edges but still held its shape. Lying on the oilcloth were 3 objects. A brown leather record case the size of a large book, its strap buckled closed. A small tin lockbox with a simple hasp latch. And a wax envelope sealed with a letter inside she could see the shape of through the translucent paper. She lifted them out one at a time and carried them carefully down the 4 steps to the dance floor, where the afternoon light came through the tall windows on the south wall, in long pale columns that moved with the dust she'd raised. She sat cross-legged on the wide pine floor, with the 3 objects arranged in front of her. She opened the leather record case first. Inside, in fitted individual slots lined with felt, were 14 lacquer-cut acetate discs, each one in a paper sleeve, each sleeve labeled in the same spidery hand she had seen on the envelope Dot Eckert had given her at the township office. Harrow Mills Dance Hall, March 14th, 1948, April 11th, 1948, June 19th, 1948. The dates ran forward through 1949 and 1950, and 1951, and into 1952. The last one was dated February 7th, 1953. 14 Saturday nights. Private acetate recordings cut on a portable rig in a Pine Barrens dance hall pressed into lacquer by someone who had cared enough about what was happening in this room to preserve it. She held one disc up toward the south window. The lacquer was yellowed and the surface was scratched with years of contact, but the grooves were intact. These discs were playable. Whatever sound had been pressed into them on those Saturday nights in Burlington County between 1948 and 1953 was still there, held in the spiral grooves, waiting. She opened the tin lockbox next. Inside, in neat bundles bound with paper bands that had crumbled, but still held their general shape, were old large format United States banknotes from the late 1940s and early 1950s. She counted carefully, twice. $6,840. Beneath the bills, wrapped in a piece of flannel cloth, was a silver bandleader's baton, tarnished to near black, with an engraved handle. She tilted it toward the window light. The initials read LM. And beneath the baton, a thick sheaf of handwritten music, original arrangements for an 8-piece band, the horn parts and chord changes written out on lined manuscript paper. In that same small, careful hand, the hand of someone who had made his living writing music charts and had never stopped caring whether they were legible. Lou Mancini, Harrow Mills, 1948. At the bottom of each page. She set the baton down carefully and picked up the wax envelope. The letter inside was on heavy cream paper, the ink brown with age, but the writing clear. Unhurried, the hand of a man who knew what he wanted to say and had taken his time saying it. She read it. To whoever finds this, my name is Lou Mancini. I was the band leader and the owner of Harrow Mills Dance Hall from 1928 until tonight, June 22nd, 1957. Tonight is the last dance. After tonight, I will lock the doors, and there will be no more Saturdays at Harrow Mills. I am 62 years old, and I have no children. My wife, Loretta, passed in 1953. From a sickness the doctors at Cooper Hospital in Camden could not name. I ran this dance hall for 29 years, and I led the house band for 29 years. And I watched the people of Burlington County come here on every Saturday night of every season to dance. And I watched them stop coming in the last few years. Because the music on the radio has changed, and the young people don't want to dance to a horn section anymore. I cannot blame them. Music belongs to whoever is making it now, not to whoever made it before. I have saved a portion of every Saturday night door fee for 30 years and kept it in this lockbox under the bandstand floor where my father-in-law, Aldo, built the compartment in 1928 because he did not trust banks after what happened in 1929. I am leaving the money here. I am leaving the 14 discs that my brother-in-law, Sammy Garibaldi, cut for us between 1948 and 1953 before he moved to California. He cut them on a portable rig he brought in the trunk of his Pontiac, and he gave me a copy of every Saturday night he was there for. These are the only recordings of the Harrow Mills House Band that exist anywhere in the world. I am leaving the arrangements I wrote myself. I am leaving the silver baton my mother gave me when I started the band, because it belongs in this room with the rest of it. I want you to know that in the summer of 1952, A young trumpet man came in off the highway one Saturday night and sat in with the band for the second and third sets. He played the most honest horn I had heard in this room in 20 years of Saturday nights. Sammy was there that night with his rig. The playing is on the August disc. I don't know his name. He said it was Sal, and that he was from Asbury Park. And then he got in his car and drove back north, and I never saw him again. But I have never forgotten how he played. If you know who Sal from Asbury Park was, I want you to know that he played beautifully, and that this room remembers him. If you are reading this, you came into this dance hall after I'm gone. Maybe long after. I don't know who you are, or why you came. But whoever you are, this belongs to you now. Loretta would have wanted you to have it. So would I. Lou Mancini, bandleader, Harrow Mills Dance Hall, June 22nd, 1957. Wren read the letter once. She sat very still on the wide pine floor with the late afternoon light moving across the boards around her. Then she reached into the inside pocket of the leather satchel and took out the concert program. August 9th, 1952. Her father's handwriting beneath the printed text. Someday, Wren. She put the program beside the letter on the floor in front of her. She looked at them both. Lou Mancini had not known the trumpet man's last name, but he had known the first, Sal. From Asbury Park, the most honest horn he had heard in this room in 20 years of Saturday nights. Sal Santee had stood on the stage above her. Sal Santee's voice was on the August disc in the leather case. Sal Santee had driven away in his oil-burning Ford, without knowing that Sammy Garibaldi had captured 47 seconds of him, or that those 47 seconds would sit in a sealed compartment under a dance hall floor for 65 years, waiting for someone who carried his blood to come and find them. Cass Santee had known about this place. He had kept the program. He had written his daughter's name on it. He had meant to bring her here and show her where her grandfather had played the most honest horn that Lou Mancini had ever heard in this room. And he had not lived long enough to do it. So, she had found it herself, the way her grandfather had found it turning off the highway because he could hear music from the road and could not drive past it. Wren looked up from the letter and the concert program and out across the empty hall. The light through the tall south windows was going orange, now beginning its long slide toward the tree line beyond the clearing. She spoke to the room. She had not planned to. The words came from somewhere that was not entirely conscious. Thank you, Mr. Mancini. I'll play this room again. The room held the words for a moment in its extraordinary acoustics. Then the silence came back deep and resonant and full of something she could not name, though she knew it was there. The way you know a note is there even after it has stopped being audible. The way a room remembers what it has held. She sat with the three objects on the wide pine floor until the light was almost gone. Then she pinned the mother-of-pearl brooch to her jacket lapel, put the letter carefully back in its wax envelope, and began to think about what needed doing. The first thing she did the next morning was walk the building, not the way she had walked it the evening before, when she had been moving through something close to revelation, and the room had been lit by the particular quality of late afternoon light that makes ordinary things look like they are being seen for the first time. This was a different kind of walking, methodical. The way her father had walked a workbench at the start of a job, moving from left to right, touching nothing yet, only looking, building an accurate inventory of what was present, and what was needed before a single tool came out of the box. She had slept on the cot in the back room behind the bandstand, the small storage room that smelled like cedar and old paint, and the particular dryness of a space that has been sealed for decades. She had made the cot from a folding frame she found leaning against the back wall, and a wool blanket from her satchel. She had set Cass's wooden toolbox on the floor beside the cot and placed the leather record case and the tin lockbox on top of it because they needed to be near her. And the toolbox was the closest thing she had to a safe. She had lain in the dark for a long time before sleep came, listening to the building settle around her. Old wood has a language of its own, a vocabulary of creaks and contractions, and the low, irregular percussion of structural members adjusting to temperature change. She had grown up above a workshop, and she knew the difference between the sounds of a building failing and the sounds of a building simply being old and present, and Harrow Mills was the latter. It was speaking in the way old things speak when someone pays attention to them. In the morning, she walked every room twice. She opened every door she could find and stood in every doorway long enough to understand what she was looking at. She tested the floorboards across the full width of the dance floor, pressing her heel into the boards at regular intervals, listening for the soft, hollow note that meant rot beneath the surface. She found 3 boards near the north radiator wall that flexed more than they should, but the rot was surface level and had not reached the joists. She could replace those boards herself with what was in Cass's toolbox and a trip to the lumber yard in Mount Holly. The roof over the bandstand was the serious problem. She had known this from the listing. 3 sections of shingle were gone over the upstage right corner, and the sheathing boards beneath them had taken 20 winters of water. She could see the sky through the gap if she stood at the right angle on the stage, a jagged, pale opening about 4 feet across. The ceiling plaster had come down in a pile below it, and the stage floor in that corner was dark with old water damage. She tested the joists with a pocket knife blade, working it into the wood at several points, and found that the damage was less deep than it looked from above. The structure was sound. What it needed was a roofer, and a roofer cost money she did not yet have. But she had the lockbox, and she had the letter, and the letter made clear whose money was in the lockbox and what it was for. She carried the tin lockbox to the south windows where the morning light was strongest, and sat on the dance floor and counted the bills again, carefully separating them into denominations and smoothing the old paper with the flat of her hand. $6,840 in large format bills from the late 1940s and early 1950s, the kind of currency that had not been in common circulation since well before she was born. Legal tender still, but conspicuous. She would need to take them to a bank that understood old currency and be prepared to answer questions. She set aside $200 in the smallest bills for immediate needs. Everything else went back into the lockbox, which went back into the leather satchel, which went everywhere she went. She made a list in the back of Cass's notebook, the same notebook where she had found the concert program. It felt right to use it. She wrote in the margins around his repair notes, around the parts orders and the client names and the small, careful measurements he had made in the course of 25 years of instrument work. Roof, bandstand corner, priority 1, boards, north wall, 3 sections, windows, south wall, 2 panes cracked. Well, inspect, test. Electrical, unknown. Assume 0. Radiators, inspect for cracks, bleed. She looked at the list for a while. Then she added at the bottom 14 acetate discs. Find a way to hear them. Dot Eckert came on Wednesday morning as she had said she would, driving a sensible sedan down the sand road and parking at the edge of the clearing. She brought a thermos of tea and a copy of the Wharton Township newsletter, which was 4 pages long and covered in its entirety the local concerns of a community small enough that the newsletter still mattered. Dot walked the perimeter of the building with Wren without being asked, looking at the foundation and the siding and the roofline with the appraising eye of someone who had been a township clerk long enough to have inspected a great many properties and understood what she was seeing. She said little. When they came back to the front entrance, she said, "The well out back is artesian. It's been capped since the county took over the property. I can have the county inspector out next week to uncap it and test the water. No charge. The county owes this building that much." Wren thanked her. Dot looked at the blank marquee board above the entrance for a moment. Lou Mancini put the last letters up on that board in June of 1957, she said. I was 3 years old. My mother brought me here to dance when I was small. She said Lou's band played Stardust the way Hoagie Carmichael always intended it, and nobody else ever quite got there. She paused. I'll see about the well inspector. She drove back up the sand road. Wren stood in the clearing for a moment after the car was gone and felt the specific quality of gratitude that has no adequate response except to do the work you have been trusted to do. Herb Daly drove out from Princeton on a Thursday in early April. He was in his late 60s, a compact and deliberate man who wore a canvas field jacket and carried a worn leather briefcase that had clearly been used for exactly this kind of visit many times before. He had been a vintage music collector for 40 years and an appraiser for 30, and he had the professional calm of someone who has learned to keep his expression neutral until he is ready to speak because premature reactions in his line of work were expensive. He had heard about the Harrow Mills acetates from a mutual connection, a sound archivist at a small record shop in Princeton who knew Wren had been asking about how to get old lacquer discs evaluated. Herb had driven out without much expectation. Private acetate recordings from small venue dance halls in the 1940s and early 1950s were not uncommon. Most were of limited documentary interest and modest monetary value. Wren set the leather record case on the dance floor and opened it and stood back. Herb crouched beside the case and examined the discs one at a time, without removing them from their sleeves, reading the labels, noting the dates, assessing the condition of the lacquer surfaces from the angle of the light. He did this for the better part of 15 minutes without speaking. Then he stood up. These are in remarkable condition, he said. Whoever stored them understood that acetate needs darkness and stable temperature. The cedar compartment and the oilcloth did the job. I won't know the full condition of the grooves until I can run a stylus across them in a controlled environment. But from what I can see, all 14 of these are playable. What would they be worth? Wren asked. Wren, to sell. A collection like this, 14 private press acetates from a documented regional dance venue, consecutive Saturday nights across a 5-year span, good to excellent condition. I would offer you $22,000 for the full set today. That's a fair price. Other collectors would come in lower. Wren looked at the discs in their felt-lined slots. $22,000. She looked at the list in the back of Cass's notebook. The roof, the boards, the windows, the electrical. I'm not selling them, she said. Herb nodded as if this was a reasonable thing to say, which in his experience it sometimes was and sometimes was not. I want to hear them, she said. I need to know what's on them, particularly the August 1952 disc. Herb looked at her. You know something about what's on it. I think so. I'm not certain. He thought for a moment. I have a Presto transcription turntable in my shop in Princeton. It can run lacquer acetates without damaging them if the stylus is correct. I'll bring the August disc in, run it in a controlled environment, and make a high-quality digital transfer. You keep the original. If what you're looking for is on it, we discuss next steps. If you want to license transfers of some of the others to offset your restoration costs, that's a conversation we can have. Wren considered this. She picked up the August 1952 disc in its paper sleeve. She had handled it carefully every time she touched it, the way her father had handled a good horn from the edges, never the surface. Can you bring it back the same day? I can bring it back the same day. She handed it to him. She watched him place it in a padded sleeve from his briefcase with the same care she had used, and she felt the specific anxiety of entrusting something irreplaceable to another person's hands, which was a feeling she recognized from watching her father receive a client's instrument across the counter in the shop on Cookman Avenue. He drove back toward Princeton with the disc wrapped in his briefcase. Wren went back to work. She was on the bandstand roof on a Saturday morning in the second week of April when the pickup truck came down the sand road. She had borrowed a ladder from Dot Eckert's nephew and had been on the roof since early morning pulling the damaged sheathing boards from the bandstand corner and stacking them on the ground below to assess what could be saved and what needed to go. She had replaced shingles before. The summer she was 15, Sister Frances had recruited her to help reshingle the sacristy roof at St. Brendan's, and the old nun who coordinated the parish's physical plant had stood below with a diagram and talked her through the sequence while she worked. It was not complicated work. It was patient work. There was a difference. The pickup that came down the sand road was an older model, dark green with a wooden toolbox bolted to the bed. It pulled into the clearing and a man got out. He was in his late 60s or early 70s, heavy-set, moving with the deliberate economy of someone whose joints had opinions about the cold, but who had decided not to consult them. He wore canvas work pants and a heavy flannel shirt, and he had the particular hands of a man who had spent his working life building and repairing things. Hands that were large and permanently marked with the fine dark lines of old work ground into the skin. He looked up at Wren on the roof. "You're doing that wrong," he said. It was not unkind. Wren looked down at him. "I'm open to correction. You're working the wrong direction. You're pulling from the high side when you should start at the damaged corner and work back towards sound material. Otherwise, you're going to open up more weather surface than you need to." He looked at the stack of boards she had pulled. "Some of those can go back. The warrott's only in the first half inch. You cut off the bad end and you've got usable sheathing." He went back to the pickup and came back with a tool belt and his own ladder. "Gil Pruitt," he said, extending one of those permanently marked hands upward to her. "I live about 2 miles down the main road. Dot Eckert told me a young woman was out here trying to re-roof the bandstand corner by herself." Wren shook his hand from the ladder. "Wren Santee, I know who you are. Everybody in Wharton Township knows who you are by now." He set his ladder against the building a few feet from hers and began to climb. I retired 6 years ago from 35 years in residential construction. I've got time and I've got the right tools and I'm not charging you anything. So don't argue with me about it." She didn't argue with him. They worked together all day, Gil directing and Wren following and learning as she went, cutting the bad ends from the salvageable sheathing boards and fitting them back in, laying new underlayment from the roll Gil produced from his truck bed, setting new shingles from a stock of architectural shingles he had brought, without being asked, because he had taken one look at the roof from the road and knew what it would need. By late afternoon, the bandstand corner was closed. It would need a final course of ridge cap in the morning, and then caulk along the flashing, but the weather was out. They came down off the roof as the light was going gold through the pitch pines. Gil looked at the building from the clearing with his hands in his pockets. "Lou Mancini built this dance hall sound," he said. "The bones are good. You could run this room for another 50 years if you take care of it." He looked at her. "You going to run it?" "I'm going to play in it," she said. He considered this. "Same thing more or less," he said, and went to put his tools in the truck. Herb Daly came back on a Tuesday with the August 1952 disc and a digital audio file on a small drive. They sat on the dance floor with Herb's laptop, and he played the transfer through small external speakers he had brought, because he had understood when she handed him the disc that this moment would matter, and he was a careful man who prepared for moments that mattered. The recording opened with room noise, the creak of chairs, voices at the far edge of intelligibility, a drum fill that established the tempo and then dropped back, and then the band Lou Mancini's 8-piece Pine 8, playing a mid-tempo standard she recognized after 4 bars. Her father had played it in the shop on a small radio. He kept on the corner of the workbench a song called "These Foolish Things" that she associated entirely with the smell of brass polish and the sound of a saxophone being brought back to life under careful hands. The band played 2 full choruses, and then the trumpet solo began. She knew immediately that it was not Lou Mancini. She had listened to enough of the other transfers Herb had made of different discs to recognize the way Lou played the smooth, considered professional tone of a man who had spent 30 years leading a band from the front chair and had learned to make his playing serve the room rather than call attention to itself. This was different. This was someone for whom the horn was not a professional instrument, but a personal one. Someone who played it the way you speak in a room when you think no one is listening, with a directness and an absence of performance that was startling on a recording made in a public venue on a Saturday night. The solo ran 47 seconds. She counted them. Not because she needed to, but because Lou Mancini had counted them too, in the way that people count the seconds of things that matter while they are happening, not knowing why, only knowing that the number will be important later. 47 seconds of Sal Santi's trumpet pressed into lacquer on an August night in 1952, sealed under a dance hall floor for 65 years. Herb said nothing. He understood this was not a moment for comment. When the track ended, Wren sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the south windows where the April light was coming in clean and level across the pine floor. "He never recorded professionally," she said. "He played 30 years, and there's nothing. No studio records, no commercial releases, no broadcast recordings. This is the only one." "I suspected as much," Herb said. "The way he plays in this solo, it's the playing of someone who has never been in a recording situation before. There's no self-consciousness, no awareness of the microphone. It's entirely present tense playing. He paused. Who was he? My grandfather. Herb was quiet for a moment. Does anyone else know? Not yet. He nodded. He closed the laptop slowly, the way you close something that deserves to be closed carefully. I want you to know that what you have in those 14 discs is significant regardless of this track. But this track is something different. A sole surviving private recording of an undocumented musician is genuinely rare. The right people will care about this. What right people? Right people, academic music historians, sound archives. There's a program at Rutgers that documents jazz and vernacular music history in the New Jersey region. There's a woman there named Dr. Ellen Marsh who does exactly this kind of work. She would want to know about this recording. Wren looked at the drive on the floor between them. I'm not selling the disc. I'm not suggesting you sell it. I'm suggesting you let the right people hear it. He picked up the drive and held it out to her. That's your decision, but the recording can't do anything for anyone sitting in a lockbox. She took the drive. May Corwin came for the first time on a Saturday in late April, driving a car that was at least 20 years old and parking it with the particular care of someone who regards vehicles as serious responsibilities. She was in her mid-70s, a small, composed woman with white hair, cut short and practical, and the self-contained manner of someone who has lived alone in a rural area long enough to have arrived at genuine peace with her own company. She brought a basket. Inside the basket was a jar of cranberry preserves and a loaf of bread from the bakery in Brown's Mills and a black and white photograph in a cardboard frame. My parents, she said, handing the photograph to Wren. My mother and my father, standing on these steps. 1949. Wren looked at the photograph. A man and a woman on the front steps of Harrow Mills Dance Hall. The marquee board behind them visible and filled with letters she couldn't quite read at the photo's resolution. They were dressed in their Saturday clothes, the woman in a swing skirt and a light-colored blouse. The man in a dark suit with his hat in his hand. They were smiling the way people smile in photographs when the photograph is not an event in itself, but only the incidental documentation of an evening that is the event. My mother danced here every Saturday night from 1946 until Lou Mancini closed the doors in 1957, May said. She talked about it her whole life. She said it was the best room she ever danced in. Something about the floor. She looked down at the pine boards, the spring in it. She said you could feel the music through the floor before you heard it. Wren looked down at the floor, too. She had felt it herself the day she arrived, standing at the edge of the room, the slight living quality of the old pine boards under her feet. Would you mind, Wren said, if I put this photograph up near the entrance? May looked at the front wall beside the door. My mother would have liked that. Wren hung the photograph above the entrance with 2 small nails. May sat in a folding chair Wren had placed at the front of the dance floor and watched the process with the patient attention of someone who has come to see something specific happen and is content to let it take the time it takes. After the photograph was hung, Wren went up to the bandstand and picked up the accordion. She played for 2 hours into the empty hall. May Corwin sat in the folding chair with her hands in her lap and her eyes partially closed and listened with the absolute stillness of someone who is not hearing the music so much as receiving it. When Wren finished and came down off the bandstand, May said only, "Same time next Saturday." "Same time next Saturday," Wren said. May Corwin was there every Saturday after that. She always brought something in the basket. She always sat in the same chair. She always left a few dollars in the tin Wren had set on the edge of the bandstand. She never said much about what she heard. She didn't need to. The act of returning was its own articulate statement. Sister Frances came down from Asbury Park in the second week of May. She took the bus to Brown's Mills, and Dot Eckert's nephew picked her up at the bus stop and drove her out the sand road. And when she stepped out of the pickup at the clearing's edge and looked at Harrow Mills dance hall in the spring afternoon light, she stood still for a long moment, with her hands clasped at her waist, before she said anything. "The roof looks right," she said finally. "Someone who knows what they're doing fixed that roof." "Gil Pruitt," Wren said. "Is he a good man?" "He's a very good man." Sister Frances nodded as if this confirmed a calculation she had already made. She had brought a suitcase and the tin of biscotti she always brought when she traveled, and Wren set her up on the folding cot in the back room and gave her the wool blanket and the kerosene lantern. She stayed 4 days. She helped Wren polish the brass hardware on the front doors, the push plates and the kick plates, and the old thumb latch mechanism that had seized with decades of disuse and required patient work with oil and a careful hand before it moved freely again. She sat with Wren at the piano keyboard Wren had borrowed from Gil Pruitt's garage, a small upright he had hauled in on a Saturday morning without being asked. And they played together the way they had played in the basement music room at St. Brendan's on those Sunday afternoons. 2 years of Sunday afternoons ago. Sister Frances at the keys, and Wren on the accordion, the music moving between them without needing to be directed. On the third morning, Sister Frances walked the dance floor alone for a long time, while Wren worked on the north wall radiators, bleeding air from the system and checking the valves. The old nun moved slowly around the perimeter of the room, pausing at the windows, pausing at the radiators, pausing at the stage. She ran her hand along the wainscoting. She stood at the base of the 4 wooden steps and looked up at the stage without climbing it. On the morning of the 4th day, her last morning, she stood on the front steps in the May sunlight and said what she had come to say. "I want to tell you something, Wren. Cass came to me about 4 years before he died. He sat in that music room on a Sunday afternoon right where you used to sit, and he asked me a question. He said, should he take Wren down to that old dance hall in Burlington County? He said his father had played there once, and the place had been in his mind for years, and he had a feeling Wren ought to see it." Wren was very still. "I told him to wait," Sister Frances said. "I told him she was too young, that she needed to be older to understand what it meant, that she needed to have more of her own music in her before she stood in a room that had held that much of someone else's." She paused. "I was wrong about the timing. I should have said go. I'm telling you that plainly." Wren said nothing. "He didn't make it. But you got here. And you got here because you are his daughter and your grandfather's granddaughter, and because this is the room that was waiting for you, and it kept waiting as long as it needed to." Sister Frances put her hand briefly on Wren's cheek, the specific gesture of someone who has earned the right to it through 40 years of presence. Tony would have been proud. Sal would have been proud. You are a Santee in the only way that counts. Wren stood on the front steps of Harrow Mills dance hall, and for the first time since the cold February evening, she had read Vera Hollis's note on the apartment door, let herself cry. Not because it was grief, though. Grief was present. Because it was also something else. Something she did not entirely have a word for. Which was the feeling of having been held in a shape that was intended for you before you knew the shape existed. Sister Frances stood beside her and did not rush it. When the county shuttle came to the end of the sand road an hour later, Sister Frances got her suitcase and walked to it and got in and did not look back, because she understood that looking back at a moment you have completed is a way of diminishing it. And she had spent 71 years learning not to diminish completed things. Wren sat on the front steps for a long time after the shuttle was gone. Dr. Ellen Marsh drove out from Rutgers on a Thursday in early June. She was in her early 50s, with the organized, forward-leaning energy of an academic who spends more time in the field than at the desk and is better for it. She had published 3 books on New Jersey vernacular music history and had spent the last 12 years documenting the regional jazz tradition of the mid-Atlantic states, which was a field with more material in it than most people suspected and fewer researchers than it deserved. Herb Daly had sent her a message about the Harrow Mills acetates in April. She had been trying to clear her schedule ever since. Wren gave her the same presentation she had given Herb. The record case open on the dance floor. The discs in their labeled sleeves. The letter from Lou Mancini. The lockbox and the arrangements, and the silver baton with the initials LM. Ellen Marsh moved through the materials with professional care, reading the labels on each disc, reading the letter twice, examining the handwritten arrangements 1 page at a time. She did not rush. Then Wren played her the digital transfer of the August 1952 disc through the laptop speakers. Ellen Marsh listened to the full track with the focused stillness of someone for whom listening was a professional skill developed over decades. When the trumpet solo began, she leaned forward slightly. When it ended, she sat back. "Who is this?" she said. His name was Sal Santee. He was a trumpet player from Asbury Park. He played club dates along the Jersey Shore from the late 1940s through the mid-1950s. And then he became the house drummer at Convention Hall in Asbury Park from 1962 to 1979. He never recorded professionally. Ellen Marsh looked at her. "How do you know this is him?" Wren reached into the leather satchel and brought out the concert program. August 9th, 1952. Lou Mancini's letter. She set them side by side. A young trumpet man from Asbury Park who sat in one August night in 1952. The program dated exactly to that night. "He was my grandfather," Wren said. Ellen Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then she said with the careful precision of someone delivering a finding in its accurate weight, "This is the only recorded documentation of Sal Santee as a trumpet player in existence. To my knowledge, based on the archive I've been building for 12 years, no other recording of him exists anywhere. This 47 seconds is everything." The words sat in the room. "I know," Wren said. "I want to write about this. I want to include the Harrow Mills acetates in the regional archive. I want this recording properly documented and preserved." She paused. "The Smithsonian's American Music Program will almost certainly want to be in contact with you. There may be institutional interest in the full collection. I'm not selling the discs. I'm not asking you to sell them. I'm asking you to let them be heard." Ellen Marsh looked at the leather record case. Sal Santee played 47 seconds of the most present music I've heard in a long time. and it's been sitting in the dark for 65 years. It should be in the light. Wren looked at the case on the pine floor. She thought about what Lou Mancini had written. A song does not stop being a song just because the band has gone home. She thought about 47 seconds pressed into lacquer on an August night by a man who did not know he was being recorded, who climbed back into his car afterward and drove north without understanding that he had left something behind. "You can document the collection," she said. "You can make preservation transfers of all 14 discs. The originals stay here." She looked at Ellen Marsh steadily. "This is where they belong." Ellen Marsh held her gaze. Then she nodded with the respect of someone accepting terms that are right. "The originals stay here," she agreed. She drove back toward New Brunswick with a list of dates for the documentation work, and the understanding that whatever came next would happen on Wren's terms. Which was, Wren thought, watching the car disappear up the sand road. The correct way for it to happen. She went back inside. She climbed the 4 steps to the bandstand. She picked up the accordion and sat on the edge of the stage with her feet hanging over, and played the song her father had always played when he finished a difficult repair and needed to let the work settle before he moved on to the next thing. A slow, unhurried standard she had known all her life. The melody moving through the long room and off the far wall and back to her with the room's natural reverb wrapping around it. The way good acoustics wrap around a note that is worth keeping. She played until the light through the south windows had gone gold, and then orange, and then the quiet gray of early evening. She played because that was what the room was for. And the room held every note she gave it, the way it had always held the notes of the people who had trusted it with their best playing and gave them back clean and resonant and full of something that had no name in the language, but that every musician who had ever stood in a room like this one had felt, which was the specific sense of not being alone in the work of playing into a space that already knew how to receive what you were offering. That was what a room like Harrow Mills was. That was what it had always been. Summer came to the Pine Barrens the way it always came, not with announcement, but with accumulation. The pitch pines deepened from the pale, uncertain green of spring into something darker and more permanent. The cedar swamp behind the building filled with sound, the long, sustained note of insects that had been waiting all winter for exactly this temperature, this light, this specific density of air. The cranberry bogs across the trees went from dormant brown to a vivid, low ground cover that caught the morning light in a way that made the whole landscape look briefly lit from within. The sand road dried out from its spring softness and firmed back into the pale, packed surface that reflected heat upward in the afternoons and held the coolness of the pines on either side of it in the mornings. Wren had been at Harrow Mills for 3 months. She knew the building now the way you come to know a place you have been living and working in with full attention, which is different from knowing a place you merely occupy. She knew which floorboard in the dance hall produced a slightly higher note under her heel than its neighbors, and exactly where on the stage the acoustics changed the precise spot where a note sent toward the back wall came back, with a half-second of natural reverb that no built environment could have engineered better if it tried. She knew how the south windows tracked the light across the floor from morning to afternoon, and how the room changed character as that light moved the way it was coolest and most contained in the early morning and opened up into something warmer and more generous by midday. She knew when the wind shifted in the pines and what it meant for the weather coming. She knew the sound of Gil Pruitt's pickup coming down the sand road before she could see it. She knew the particular quality of silence that settled over the building after May Corwin left on Saturday afternoons, a silence that was fuller than the silence before May arrived, because it had more in it. She had been playing every Saturday, alone at first, then with Gil Pruitt and his harmonica on the Saturdays when he came by to check on the ongoing repairs, and stayed because the staying was easy and the music was there. The Saturday sessions had no formal start time and no formal end. Wren went up to the bandstand when the afternoon light reached the angle she had decided without consciously deciding it was the right angle, and she played until the playing was done. Some Saturdays that was an hour. Some Saturdays it was 3. The tin on the edge of the bandstand accumulated small contributions from the people who found their way down the sand road. Not many people. Wharton Township was not a place with significant foot traffic, but word moved in the way word moves in a small rural community, not through announcement or advertising, but through the specific informal network of people who know other people who mention things in passing at the general store in Brown's Mills, or at the counter of the diner on Route 530, or at the monthly township meeting in Dot Eckert's office. A young woman out at the old Harrow Mills place playing accordion on Saturday afternoons. Free to listen. No obligation. The people who came were not many. They were enough. The letter from Sister Frances arrived in the first week of June. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of paper and a small wooden sign, the kind made from a single piece of pine board, about 14 inches wide, with a routed edge and hand-lettered text. The lettering was careful, and unhurried dark blue paint on pale wood, in a hand she recognized from 40 years of music theory, worksheets and program notes. Saturdays, 3 p.m., and below that smaller Harrow Mills dance hall. The note said I made this in the convent woodshop. Father Hennessy taught me to use the router in 1987. And I have been waiting for a project worthy of it ever since. Put it on the marquee board. Lou Mancini left that board blank for someone. I think he left it for you. Frances. Wren stood on the front steps for a long time holding the sign. Then she got the ladder from the barn and climbed to the marquee board and fitted the wooden sign into the channel. At the bottom of the frame where the removable letters had once been, slid into place for each week's listing. The sign fit as if it had been measured for the space, which it had not been, which meant Sister Frances had done the calculation in her head from memory, and gotten it right, which was entirely consistent with everything Wren knew about Sister Frances. She climbed back down and stood in the clearing and looked at the marquee board. Saturdays, 3 p.m., Harrow Mills Dance Hall. The blank board that had hung crooked from its single bracket for 65 years now said something. It said what it had always been designed to say, which was that there was music here on Saturday afternoons, and that the people of Burlington County were welcome to come and hear it. She went inside and picked up the accordion and played for 2 hours into the empty room with the front door open, and the June air moving through from the cedar swamp and the pitch pines. The Smithsonian called in late June. It was a program officer from the American Folklife Center, a measured and courteous woman named Patricia Holden, who had received Dr. Ellen Marsh's documentation report and the preservation transfers of all 14 acetate discs, and was calling to discuss the collection's significance. Wren sat on the edge of the bandstand with the phone and listened. Patricia Holden explained carefully and without condescension that the Harrow Mills acetate collection was considered a significant document of mid-century regional vernacular music in the northeastern United States, that the recordings of Lou Mancini's Pine 8 represented one of the more complete surviving records of a small regional dance hall ensemble from the period, that the American Folklife Center would be honored to include preservation quality transfers in its archive and to support documentation of the collection's provenance. In the August 1952 recording, Patricia Holden said the trumpet solo. Dr. Marsh has provided her analysis. We would very much like to discuss how that recording might be included in the archive's documentation of undocumented regional musicians. The originals stay at Harrow Mills, Wren said. I've already been through this with Dr. Marsh. We're not asking for the originals. We're asking for the right to include the preservation transfers in the National Archive and to document Sal Santi as a performer in the Folklife Center's Registry of Regional Musicians. Wren thought about this. She thought about Sal Santi, who had spent 30 years making music in rooms that did not record him, and had died without knowing that 47 seconds of him existed anywhere outside the memories of the people who had been in those rooms. She thought about what it would mean for his name to be in a national archive, not as a famous musician, not as someone history had already claimed, just as a man who had played honestly in the rooms he was given and had once on an August night in 1952 played something worth keeping. Yes, she said. You can include him in the registry. His name was Salvatore Santi. He went by Sal. He was born in Hoboken, New Jersey in 1928. He played trumpet and cornet along the Jersey Shore from approximately 1948 to the mid-1950s, and he was the house drummer at Convention Hall in Asbury Park from 1962 to 1979. He never recorded professionally. He had one son. His son had one daughter. A brief pause on the line. Thank you, Patricia Holden said quietly. We'll document him well. Wren ended the call and sat on the edge of the bandstand in the June afternoon and looked out across the dance floor. The light through the south windows was moving across the pine boards in the slow way it moved in midsummer, when the days were long enough that the light had time to travel the full width of the room before the afternoon ended. She thought about Sal Santi driving north on the two-lane blacktop after leaving Harrow Mills on the night of August 9th, 1952, the oil-burning Ford, the trumpet case on the back seat, the radio probably on the windows, probably open the Pine Barrens air, moving through with its resin smell and its coolness, even in August and Sal not knowing what he had left behind in that room, not knowing about Sammy Garibaldi's acetate rig, or the shallow compartment under the bandstand floor, or the careful hands of Lou Mancini's father-in-law, who had built that compartment in 1928, because he did not trust banks after the crash, not knowing that 65 years later, his granddaughter would sit on the edge of that same bandstand and listen to 47 seconds of his trumpet on a small digital drive and count the seconds while she listened. She picked up the accordion and played. On a Saturday afternoon in late July, May Corwin brought two things in her basket instead of one. The first was the usual jar of cranberry preserves. The second was a second photograph larger than the first in a cardboard sleeve that May held with both hands as she crossed the clearing, protecting it from the heat. I found this when I was going through my mother's things last month, May said. She had the careful manner of someone delivering something they understand to be significant and want to get right. I wasn't sure when to bring it. I kept thinking about it, and then I thought there's no point in thinking about it anymore, when the right thing to do is just bring it. She handed Wren the photograph. It was larger than the one of May's parents on the front steps, and it was an interior shot. Someone had photographed the inside of Harrow Mills dance hall from the back of the room, shooting toward the bandstand on what was clearly a Saturday night. The room was full. Couples on the dance floor, the wainscoting visible along the walls, the velvet curtain framing the stage, the gold lettering above the stage legible in the photograph's resolution, and on the stage, Lou Mancini's 8-piece Pine 8, set up in their formal arrangement with the horn players at the front and the rhythm section behind. Lou himself visible at the far left of the frame, his back partially turned to the camera conducting. And at the center of the stage, standing at a microphone that had been moved to the front for the occasion, was a young man, 24 years old, a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, a trumpet held at his side with the relaxed grip of someone who had been carrying one most of his life. He was looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile, and not quite seriousness, but something between them. The expression of someone who is exactly where he is supposed to be and knows it. The photograph was dated on the back in May's mother's handwriting, August 9th, 1952. The trumpet man from Asbury Park. Wren stood in the clearing in the July heat and looked at the face of Sal Santee. She had seen photographs of him before. 2 of them, both kept in the small wooden box with Cass's personal tools, both taken when Sal was older, in his 40s or 50s. The convention hall years. In those photographs, he was a compact, weathered man, with dark eyes and the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades keeping time for other people. She had carried those photographs in her mind all her life as the image of him. This was different. This was Sal Santee at 24, standing on the stage of Harrow Mills Dance Hall, with a trumpet at his side on the night he had stopped because he could hear the music from the road, and he was the kind of musician who stopped. This was the face her father had looked at in the concert program for years before writing his daughter's name beneath the date and folding it back into the notebook. This was the face she had been moving toward without knowing it. Since the February night she had walked 7 blocks through cold rain to Sister Frances's door. She stood in the clearing for a long time. May Corwin stood a few feet away and said nothing, because she understood that this was one of those moments that does not need commentary and is diminished by it. Eventually, Wren looked up. "Can I keep this?" "My mother would have wanted you to have it," May said. "Same as the other one." Wren carried the photograph inside and up to the bandstand. She looked at the wall above the stage, where Lou Mancini's gold lettering ran across the plaster. She looked at the 2 framed arrangements she had hung there. In the spring, Frankie Lou's own handwritten charts in their careful, slanted notation. The horn parts and chord changes mapped out for the players who had stood on this stage for 30 years of Saturdays. She hung the photograph of Sal Santee between the 2 framed arrangements. Her grandfather, 24 years old, on this stage, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who is exactly where he is supposed to be. She stepped back and looked at the 3 things on the wall above the bandleader's spot. The arrangements Lou Mancini had written. The face of Sal Santee on an August night. The gold lettering of the dance hall's name above them all. The room had been holding this for 65 years. It had been holding it patiently in the way that rooms hold things when the people who left the things there trusted the room to keep them. Wren climbed down from the stage and went to the front entrance and stood in the open doorway looking out across the clearing and the cedar trees and the pitch pines beyond. Someday, Wren. Today was that day. The first real Saturday came on a clear evening in early August. Gil Pruitt had spent the previous 2 Saturdays building a small raised platform at stage left from salvage lumber, a second performance position for a second instrument, low enough that a standing player would be at eye level with Wren at the accordion without blocking the sight lines across the room. He had not been asked to build it. He had seen how the Saturday sessions were developing and had built what the room was gonna need. Dr. Ellen Marsh had called 2 weeks before to mention that one of her graduate students at Rutgers, a young man named Theo Birch, who was doing his thesis on mid-century Jersey Shore jazz traditions, played trumpet seriously enough to have performed professionally through his undergraduate years. She mentioned this without pressure, in the way of someone offering information and leaving the decision entirely to the person receiving it. Wren had called Theo Birch. He had driven out the following Saturday with his trumpet case and stayed for the session and played carefully and attentively and with the specific humility of a young musician who understands he is in a room that has held better players than himself and is trying to deserve the room rather than merely occupy it. She told him to come back. The Saturday in early August was different from the others in a way that was not dramatic, but that Wren felt from the moment she woke up on the cot in the back room. A difference in weight, in anticipation, as if the building itself had been waiting for a particular Saturday and had arrived at it. People came down the sand road through the afternoon, not a crowd. Harrow Mills was not a venue that would ever hold a crowd, and Wren had no interest in making it one. But more people than usual. May Corwin in her usual chair at the front, basket on the floor beside her, hands folded in her lap. Dot Eckert, who had not come to a session before, sitting in the middle of the room with a thermos of tea. She shared with the couple who arrived just after her from Brown's Mills. People she knew from the township, but who had driven out today on the strength of something one of them had read in the newsletter. Gil Pruitt's wife, Lorraine, whom Wren had not yet met, sat beside her husband near the north wall. She had the same composed, practical quality as Gil, the quality of a person who does not spend much time on things that don't matter, and therefore has a great deal of attention available for the things that do. A man in his late 60s, who had not been before, sat near the back with his hands on his knees. He had driven from Medford 20 miles away because his father had told him stories about Harrow Mills all through his childhood. He had never expected to sit inside it. Several others, 14 people in total, which filled a reasonable portion of the dance floor's folding chairs, without filling the room to the point where it lost its particular character, which was the character of a room that is intimate without being small and open, without being impersonal. At 3 o'clock, Wren went up to the bandstand. She set the accordion in place and adjusted the straps and looked out across the room. The afternoon light through the south windows was at the angle she had come to think of as the right angle for a Saturday at Harrow Mills. The light that came in level and warm and lay across the pine floor in long, pale rectangles that moved almost imperceptibly as the afternoon progressed. 14 people looked back at her. May Corwin, with her eyes already beginning their habitual half-close. Dot Eckert with her thermos. The man from Medford with his hands on his knees. Gil and Lorraine Pruitt along the north wall. Gil stepped up to the platform he had built at stage left and settled the harmonica between his palms with the ease of someone who has been carrying a harmonica in a shirt pocket for 50 years and can produce it without looking. Theo Birch stepped up beside the microphone stand at stage right, which Wren had found in the back room and restored to working order, and opened his trumpet case and assembled the horn with the quiet efficiency of a serious player. Not showy about it, not making it a performance within the performance. The three of them looked at each other. Wren counted 4 with a nod. Gil came in on the harmony. Theo brought the trumpet up and played the opening phrase of the first standard cleanly and with good intent. And the room received the music the way it had always received music played in it, with genuine feeling which was without reservation, without the slight hesitation that acoustically indifferent rooms impose on sound, opening to it. Instead, the way a good listener opens to a story they have been waiting to hear. They played for 2.5 hours. Not all of it was excellent. Theo had a moment in the second hour where he pushed a phrase too hard, and it went slightly wrong, and he recovered without fuss and kept playing, which was what you did. Gil lost the thread of a harmonic line in a slow passage and found it again 4 bars later, which was also what you did. Wren herself in the final half hour when the light was going warm, and she had been playing for longer than she usually played, found the melody of an old standard she had known since childhood, and felt it open under her hands into something she had not planned, something that came from the room as much as from her, the room's memory of all the Saturdays it had held, meeting the Saturday it was currently holding, and the result being a sound she could not have produced in any other place. May Corwin's eyes were entirely closed. The man from Medford had his head slightly bowed, listening the way his father might have listened, or his father's father, the listening that happens in the body as much as the ear. When Wren finally set the accordion aside and came to the front of the stage, the room was quiet for a moment, the way a good room is quiet after music that has been genuinely meant. The silence that is not empty but full of what just passed through it. Then people began to move, to stand, to reach for coats and bags, and the room came back to its ordinary self, with the ordinary sounds of an ending. And Wren climbed down from the stage and walked through the room, speaking briefly to each person as they made their way toward the door. The man from Medford stopped at the entrance and turned back. "My father talked about this place his whole life," he said. "He danced here the night Lou Mancini closed the doors in 1957. He said it was the saddest drive home he ever made." He looked at the room behind Wren, at the wainscoting and the pine floor and the stage with its velvet curtain. "I'm going to tell him about today. He's 91, and he still remembers everything." Wren looked at him. "Tell him to come on a Saturday." The man looked at her with the expression of someone receiving something unexpected. "I will," he said. "I will tell him exactly that." He went out into the August evening, and she heard his car start up and move away up the sand road through the pines. When everyone was gone, the room was hers again in the way it was hers on the evenings after the Saturday sessions, which was differently hers than it was in the mornings when she was working and thinking about what needed doing. In the evenings after music, the room had a quality she associated with completion, the quality of a thing that has done what it was made to do and is resting in the knowledge of it. She did the small things that ended a session, folded the chairs and set them against the north wall, emptied the tin from the edge of the bandstand and counted what was in it. $63. She put it in the green metal coffee tin she kept in the back room and did not think about what it represented financially, because it did not represent anything financially in any meaningful sense. It represented something else, which was the fact that people had come and listened and wanted the coming and listening to continue. She locked the front door and went out through the back of the building and sat on the low wooden step outside the back entrance where the cedar swamp began 30 feet from the building's rear wall. The August evening was warm, and the cedars were full of their summer sound, and the light was failing through the trees in the long, slow way of midsummer evenings. The day taking its time leaving because it had been a long day and there was no urgency about the dark. She had the leather satchel with her. She reached inside and took out the concert program. Harrow Mills Dance Hall, Burlington County, New Jersey. Lou Mancini and the Pine 8. Saturday, August 9th, 1952. And beneath it, in Cass's handwriting, "Someday, Wren." The paper had the texture it had always had, slightly brittle along the old fold lines, soft elsewhere from years of handling. She had taken it out and looked at it many times since the evening she had found it in the notebook. She was always looking for something new in it, some additional meaning she had not yet extracted. But the meaning was not in the paper. The meaning was in the room behind her, and in the photograph on the wall above the bandleader's spot, and in the 47 seconds of trumpet on the August disc in its felt-lined slot in the leather case inside. The meaning was in the fact that Sal Santee had stopped because he could hear music from the road, that Cass Santee had kept the program and written his daughter's name on it, that Lou Mancini had written a letter to someone he would never meet and trusted a sealed compartment under a dance hall floor to deliver it, that Dot Eckert had kept an amber envelope in a desk drawer for 65 years because a man she had never met had said it belonged to whoever came next, and she had believed him, that May Corwin's mother had danced here every Saturday night for 11 years and talked about the spring in the pine floor for the rest of her life, that Gil Pruitt had driven down a sand road with a truck full of tools because Dot Eckert had mentioned a young woman was out here trying to re-roof a dance hall by herself, and Gil was the kind of man who did not hear that and drive the other direction, that Sister Frances Dowd had opened a door in February with a dish towel in her hands and known without being told what was needed. None of these people had been trying to give Wren a life. They had only been doing the specific small things that were in front of them to do, and the small things had accumulated into something large enough to stand in and play music in on Saturday afternoons. She thought about Vera Hollis. She did not think about her often, and when she did, it was without the anger she had expected to feel, which had surprised her. The anger had been there in the beginning, in the weeks after the February landing, and it had been legitimate anger, and she had not tried to suppress it. But somewhere between the folding cot at St. Brendan's and the sand road through the pitch pines, it had resolved into something simpler and less consuming, which was only the understanding that Vera had been trying to make her own grief quieter and her own walls cleaner, and that the means she had chosen had been unkind, but the intention had been only self-preservation, which was not an admirable thing, but was a comprehensible one. Vera had closed a door in February. The door had turned Wren toward another door. That other door had been standing open for 65 years, waiting for the person who would walk through it and understand what the room inside had been holding. She put the concert program back in the satchel. She sat on the back step for a while longer with the cedar smell and the summer sound, and the last of the evening light moving through the trees. She was not waiting for anything. She was only being in the place she was in, which was something her father had taught her, without using those words the way he had modeled it every day in the shop on Cookman Avenue, by being entirely present to the instrument in his hands and the work the instrument required. Be here. Do the work in front of you. Trust the room. She reached up and touched the mother-of-pearl brooch on her jacket lapel. Lucia Santi had worn it on her coat for 50 years after bringing it across the ocean in 1928. It had lived on Wren's lapel in the cold months since she was 7 years old, and it had been on her lapel the evening she had signed her name in her father's slanted hand and received a key to a building no one had entered in 65 years. And it would be on her lapel next Saturday and the Saturday after that, because a brooch like this did not stop being what it was, just because the woman who had first worn it was gone. Things that were made to last, lasted. That was what the floorboards of Harrow Mills had always known. She went back inside. She checked the lockbox and the record case, which she still kept in the back room on the shelf above the cot. She checked the front door latch and the back door latch and the window latches along the south wall. She trimmed the kerosene lantern and set it on the small table beside the cot, and got into her wool blanket and lay on her back in the dark, with the cedar smell coming through the gap in the back window she left open for air. Above her on the wall of the back room she had pinned a small photograph she had made herself, a print of a detail from the August 9th, 1952 photograph May Corwin had brought. Just the face. Sal Santi at 24, looking at the camera from the stage of Harrow Mills in the expression between a smile and seriousness that was the expression of someone who is exactly where he is supposed to be. She looked at it in the lantern light until the lantern needed trimming, and then passed when it needed trimming, and then until the light was low enough that the photograph was only a shape on the wall. She thought about the room around her, and the room beyond the back wall, and the long dance floor with the pine boards worn silver, and the wainscoting the color of old sea glass, and the stage at the far end, and the gold lettering above the stage, and the photograph of her grandfather between the framed arrangements, and the marquee board outside above the front entrance with Sister Francis's careful lettering in it. Saturdays, 3 p.m., Harrow Mills Dance Hall. Lou Mancini had written, "A song does not stop being a song just because the band has gone home." She had understood it when she read it on the floor of the dance hall on the first evening, in the way that you can understand something in your mind before you understand it in the rest of yourself. She understood it differently now, not as a sentiment, as a structural fact about certain things in the world, the things that are made to hold meaning and hold it, regardless of how much time passes or how long the doors stay locked. A dance hall is a room that remembers. The pine floor remembers every couple that ever crossed it. The wainscoting remembers every horn line that bounced off it. The hidden compartment under the bandstand remembers the hands that built it, and the hands that sealed it, and the hands that finally opened it 65 years later, on an afternoon in late March, when the pale New Jersey spring was just beginning to make itself felt through the pitch pines. Wren June Santi was 19 years old. She had $10 to her name on the morning she signed the deed in Dot Eckert's office, and she had spent every cent of it on the building she was sleeping in, and she would not have spent it any other way. Sal Santi had stopped on a summer highway because he could hear music from the road, Cass Santee had kept a program and written his daughter's name on it and trusted that someday would come. Lou Mancini had sealed a compartment under a bandstand floor and written a letter to someone he would never know, and trusted the room to deliver it. The room had delivered it. Next Saturday at 3 o'clock, she would go up to the bandstand and pick up the accordion. The room would fill with the music, the way it had always filled, the way it had been filling every Saturday for 30 years before the doors closed and the marquee went blank, and the way it would fill next Saturday and the Saturday after, and the Saturday after that, for as long as there was someone willing to come down the sand road through the pitch pines and unlock the front door and trust the room with their best playing. That was what a dance hall was for. That was what it had always been for. And now it knew again exactly what it was.